Okay, now we can get started. Now that I am live streaming, Baruch Atah
No,
Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher anu
Mitota v'tivanu la'asot divrei Torah.
So the question, of course, is what do we do with these parshiot, these Torah portions in Genesis, when they are so full and there is so much good stuff to deal with, especially as it relates, as I try, as it relates to what's going on in the world. And so I'm going to share with all of you the material from, let's see, I think this is it. Tell me, are you looking at Torah for today?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're dealing with the second Torah portion of the life of Abraham and Sarah. And this one is Vayera, and this deals with some very well-known stories. The opening story is the one where the angels come and visit Abraham, and God visits Abraham after he circumcises himself. And also in this Torah portion is the news that he is going to have a child with Sarah, that child being Yitzchak. Also in this Torah portion is Sodom and Gomorrah. Also in this Torah portion is the Akedah. So there's no shortage of stuff. And in our short 55 minutes together, we will see what we get to. I've given 3 different pieces of what, are some of the more important stories. So the first one that we're looking at is the opening, when God appears to Abraham in the tents and says, and Abraham responds, Vayomer Adonai imna matzati chen benecha al na ta'avor me'al avdecha. He says, my lords, if it please you, do not go on past your servant. George.
Yeah, I've got the art scroll here, and you have the plural, and it says Adonai as a singular.
You need to charge your iPad.
What is it?
Well, that is a really good point.
I mean, there's 3 people, you see it's 3, and he's using a singular. Or, we got to figure this out.
Yeah. So immediately what George is pointing out to is that when you, and I don't know how many of you have a Chumash open, but I wonder if what I can do is I can stop sharing for a second. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to open up Safaria, and I'm going to open up to this week's Torah portion. Come on, computer. Sorry, it's loading. And now I'm going to share my screen again with Safaria.
Yeah, I've got a dictionary which has it singular, so I don't know,
Okay, can you all see it?
Yeah.
Okay, so it says, Vayera elav Adonai be'elyon mamre. So God, singular, God appeared to Abraham in the terebinths of Mamre. He was sitting by the entrance. Then it says in verse 2, Vayiseh naviyara hine shlosha anashim. Then looking up, he saw 3 from the entrance of the tent to greet them, and bowing to the ground, he says, Vayomer Adonai imna matzati chen benecha el na tavor me'al avdecha. My lords, if it please you, do not go on past your servant. So George notices that it begins with the singular, God appears to him. Then it continues, he looked up and he saw 3 men. And then Abraham says, Adonai. Is Adonai here going back to God? Or is Adonai the lords, like he's speaking in a proper manner to these visitors. Who is it that Abraham is addressing, and who is standing in front of Abraham, God or the three men, which we know are the three angels? Leora, jump in.
I just have a quick question because I cannot see everything in the text. Does it say the Nikud? Is it Nekuda with Adoni or Adonai?
No, it's Adonai.
Okay, thank you.
So it's really addressed as God.
Okay.
Well, the rabbis, like George, were troubled by this, and they suggest that first God did come and speak to Abraham, and in the midst of God speaking to Abraham, Abraham notices these three men. And so he kind of like says to God, hey, God, hold on a second. And he turns to the three men and he responds to these three angels. And because that is the Midrash, George, that's why the way in which it is.
So I think the lesson is you have to value interpersonal, being nice to people even before Hashem.
Okay, so that's
a possibility here.
Yeah, no question. That's what the rabbis learned from this. The rabbis learned from this that if it's a choice between speaking to God or praying to God or being in meditation regarding God and the mitzvah of doing something for another human being comes your way, then you should stop your focus on God and pay attention to the mitzvah that stands in front of you. That's the outcome of this teaching that George has suggested. Any other comments on this verse? He said, my lords, if it please you, do not go on past your servant. What else do you notice just in the language of this? Look carefully at the English or the Hebrew. How does Abraham address these people? What is the tone of his voice? What is the style of his approach?
Kind of begging.
Yeah.
Kind of. If you will, please.
Good. So what do you take from that?
Yeah.
Like, what is this teaching us about Abraham's character? That's, I guess, ultimately the question that I want to ask you. What do we learn about Abraham from the simple language that he employs in this moment in relationship to these three complete strangers? Stan and then Rob.
Well, certainly it's respect to begin with, and putting himself in a sense beneath. If you say my lord, you're saying something that you're above me in one way or another. I greet you, and we can learn from that as we value everybody in our life.
Okay, good. So two things that we've got. First of all, Leora says he's in this state of almost begging, like he's so strongly desirous of doing something for these people. And he humbles himself significantly in their presence, calling them my Lord, calling himself a servant. And right, in a sense, so strongly desirous of wanting to help. Who did I say it was next? I forgot. Oh, it was Rob, and then Eileen, and then Jack.
Yeah, I think you touched on it, but the word that came to me was humility. I think respect is a good word also, but his humility among other people he didn't know, and just being respectful of their feelings.
Great. And I want us to hold on to that, what Rob said. What is this notion of humility, and how specifically does it relate to the actions that he's going to be doing? because ultimately I want to get to, where does humility come in for us when we engage in the mitzvah of Hachnasat Orchim? What is Hachnasat Orchim? Does everybody know that?
Yeah.
Hachnasat Orchim, it means hospitality. Welcome.
I was just going to say that.
Go ahead, Eileen. I jumped the
Well,
gun. Sorry.
I'm sorry, Rabbi, but it seems to me that at that time in the world, you were always hospitable to a stranger coming to your tent, your house, whatever. And I think he's telling them not to go because he wants to be hospitable to them, give them something to eat or drink. I don't think it's a matter of him thinking that they're above him. He doesn't know they're angels.
Correct. Okay, excellent. So in other words, he is exemplifying this quality, which was much more a common practice in the ancient world than maybe it is today. Or at least it's practiced differently today than it was practiced in the ancient world. Jack.
A couple of things. I noticed that in the verse right before the sentence right before this verse, in the translation that I have, it says, he, Abraham, saw and he ran toward them from the tent flap and bowed to the ground. So there's an urgency to what he's doing beyond of just seeing somebody walk by and saying, look, don't go, come on in. He's running towards them to ensure that he can provide the hospitality that he hopes he can.
But there's a in Jewish ethics, in Musar specifically, there's a list of midot, character traits that we want to exemplify in our behaviors. And one of the primary qualities, character traits that Musar teaches us is the midah of zrizut. Zrizut is translated as alacrity. Alacrity meaning that when the opportunity for us to do a mitzvah arises, we rush to do that mitzvah. Because if we don't rush to do the mitzvah, human nature does what? What typically happens when we notice that there's an opportunity to do something? What gets in the way of us doing it?
Everything else.
Yes, everything. We are so good at making excuses for, well, do I really need to? Can somebody else do this? How should I do this? I don't have the right things to do it. We find ourselves convincing, rationalizing to not do something that we could be doing. And so by pointing out, as Jack does, that he rushes, he runs, he throws himself into this moment wholeheartedly. He's invested in the process. He could have easily have stood by the tent, hid, gone into the tent. They would have walked by, not seen anybody, and they would have continued walking by. But that's not what Abraham done. He goes out of his tent and he runs to them, and then he prostrates to the ground, begging them to come in, as Leora said. George.
Yeah, there might be more here because I don't know, it's a midrash or something. It's the third day after circumcision, which is like the most painful. So he should be doubled over, in bed, and he's running out to greet people.
That's right. Thank you. There is a midrash that says that he was in the greatest amount of pain following his surgery when he ignores his own needs for the sake of taking care of somebody else. And who are these people that he's taking care of? Total strangers. And yet he doesn't treat them as strangers. He elevates them. So let's take a look at the commentary, the Yismach Moshe. He says, Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav, greater is the mitzvah of receiving guests than even receiving the face of the Shekhinah. Now, that's based upon something that George brought up earlier. When you look at the Torah portion, it begins by saying, and the Lord appeared to Abraham at the terebinths of Mamre. Then the three men appeared, and Abraham leaves the presence of God in order to run to the three angels. And so Rabbi Yehuda, in the name of Rav, is saying greeting guests is even more important than standing before God, than praying or meditating or whatever else. That's how important this mitzvah is. How do you understand that in terms of your own life? Where might you feel this tension between like being engaged in conversation with God and the desire to take care of helping somebody else? Where, if anywhere, might this occur for us? You know where I see it sometimes. Oh yeah, Leora.
I want to say not necessarily that I see it with adult people, because usually we invite people in and then we greet them well. But I definitely can go back when the kids were younger, when the children were younger. I would drop everything for them. Engaging God, praying, make no difference.
Yeah, good, excellent example, right? When we know, especially people who we love are in need, we're supposed to drop everything and take care of it. I was thinking of it, Stan.
I was saying that almost any ritual, to me, it's more important what it teaches me than the fact that I'm doing it, whether it's through rote or otherwise. If I can't learn from it, it's almost meaningless.
Good, exactly. The whole point of any ritual is to improve our, quality of personhood. The whole purpose of ritual is to refine our character, to make us into better human beings. So I was thinking, if I am so focused in shul, for example, on my davening, on my praying, and not paying attention to the people around me and the potential needs that may exist of the people around me, then I'm losing that whole sense of prayer. Back in the old days, before the merger, when Shomrei Torah existed, I remember there was a moment on Yom Kippur at the end of Ne'ilah, after people having been in shul for all these hours praying, and then watching people's behavior as they left the service, either to rush out to get to their cars, to be first in line, to get out of the parking lot, hearing the beeping of the horns, or rushing to grab the caramel apple before anybody else could get that caramel apple, for fear that there would be no caramel apples left by the time they got out of services. And to me, that's an example of missing the point of your prayer. You're praying to God, which Abraham is perhaps doing. And then when the moment arises for him to do a mitzvah, to think about somebody else, that takes precedent. And that's the lesson that Stan here is suggesting to us. Lauren, please.
So what takes precedent over what? So we have very close friends. His identical twin brother was in Israel for the holidays. And of course, the war broke out. And they happen to be Orthodox, not our friends here, but his brother's Orthodox. And they're trying to get in touch with them, and they're not using the phone, and they're not texting. And then it's Simchas Torah, and they're not texting, and they're not answering the phone. And then they're growing crazy here. And then they won't even text here because it's Simchas Torah here a day later. So what takes precedence over what? Reassuring your brother that you're okay, or that you're observing the holiday, and then it's a holiday in the United States. So it's you're observing, or is it common? I mean, it almost you're observing God, or you're observing the holiday, or you're observing the ritual, or you're reassuring your identical twin brother that you're alive and well.
So I don't think there's an easy answer to that question. I do want to remind everybody that any Jewish law, except for 3, can be abrogated in order to save a life. The 3 that can't is committing murder, killing somebody else, sexual immorality, or idolatry. But other than those 3 things, Lauren, we can break any mitzvah in order to save another person's life. So the question is, in your question, is this about saving a person's life? Number
It
one.
wasn't, of course, no, but just
Number 2, are the people who are observant of the holiday even aware of what's going on around them? Because if they're not, like there were a lot of people in Los Angeles during the holiday who knew nothing about what was going on in Israel because they weren't watching the news and they weren't
Right.
looking at their phones. So there's no expectation that they're going to be responding to anybody or being in contact with anybody, because how would they know any better? They wouldn't know. It's not like they're making a conscious choice to ignore it. It's that their phone is put away, their TV's off, and they just don't know. So I'm not sure, and again, I don't know, but in the example that you gave, is it omission or commission, right? Is it that people know and choose to ignore, or they don't know, and therefore you can't expect them to respond because they don't know? But the blanket rule that I would say to you is, when it comes to saving a life, that takes precedence over all other things. Jack.
I recall reading in the Torah, in the Talmud, I think it's in the first tractate, Berachot, that talks about that human dignity overrides Torah law, even Torah law. That if something is necessary to preserve human dignity, that that overrides a potentially contrary Torah law.
Correct. So by extension, the rabbis say, what does it mean to save a life? Does it mean physically only to save a life, or does it mean emotionally and spiritually? And to humiliate a human being, to cause deep pain in ways, if I don't break this law, the rabbis are saying that's unacceptable. Right? So we take the liberal approach to that principle, not the most restrictive approach to that principle. All right, let's continue. So Yismach Moshe says the following. This means, right, his passage, that greater is the mitzvah of receiving guests than even receiving the face of the Shekhinah. This means great is the mitzvah of serving guests, as it is the means by which we might experience the presence of the Shekhinah. Fascinating. So what he's suggesting is Abraham, in leaving God to act with hospitality to these 3 men, he wasn't actually leaving God in that moment. He was experiencing the divine in a completely different way. Instead of formal rote prayer, or whatever, however we define the encounter that Abraham was engaged in with God a moment before, when a mitzvah appears, a mitzvah that he can help somebody else out, that is also engaging with the divine, right? It goes back to what Stan said earlier. How many times when we do a mitzvah do we think, especially when it's a mitzvah related to other people, like honoring our mothers and fathers, or giving blood at mitzvah day, or volunteering our services at a soup kitchen, how often do we think that that act is actually experiencing the presence of the divine? Talk about elevating the act, right? What makes it a mitzvah? It's not a mitzvah simply because God commands us. It's a mitzvah because it's a way that we get to encounter the divine in that work. That's the power. Yeah, Kathleen.
That kind of goes with seeing the divine image in others. That whenever we see the divine image in others, and experience their godlike qualities, we also experience the divine, just a different aspect of the divine.
That's beautiful. A lot of times people will say, I don't believe in God, or show me where God appears in the world. And Kathleen is suggesting that you want to see God, look at your fellow human being. You want to experience God, do for somebody in need, and then you will experience God, because the face of God is in the face of that other human being. You can't get more concrete than that. And that's why Abraham doesn't just dilly-dally over to the three men. He runs like the Dickens. He throws himself to the ground. He is so connected and committed to the mitzvah of service that that's the way he responds. Anita.
Back in that period of time, tents were not necessarily next to each other. And there might have been a good distance between where Abraham was and another community or another outpost of some kind. And to have not offered substance to these people could have indeed caused their death.
That's beautiful.
So I view this as also the saving of life.
That is just beautiful. I love that interpretation. To be proactive and to consider what are the greatest needs another human being has and how can I fulfill them? Right? I'm not, again, in Anita's language, Abraham isn't just thinking about the moment. He's thinking about how these people will survive well into the future and what can he do to contribute to their long-term well-being. Right? When we engage in mitzvot, how much do we throw ourselves into the moment and beyond the moment, thinking through what impact our actions could have on another? That's what Anita is inviting us to think about when we engage ourselves in opportunities to serve. Right. So let's go back to the text. Who truly is able to ascend the spiritual path to complete purity, breaking down the barriers that separate flesh and blood from godly spirituality with their good deeds, and who thereby merit to gaze upon the pleasant glow of the light of the face of the living God? But the one who invites guests to their home, even those whose manners are lacking and who are not so respectable, yet receives them with a welcome demeanor, this person is requited measure for measure, receiving in turn the presence of the Shekhinah, even if otherwise they are not worthy of blessing. Wow. Wow. What a masterful text. When you throw yourself into a mitzvah, even when people who you're doing the mitzvah for maybe are not so deserving of it and are not acting with respect and not acting with appreciation, doesn't matter, right? As long as you are wholehearted in your actions, you will receive the reward of feeling that you are in the presence of God. Have any of you ever had guests in your home who have been less than appreciative, who have overstayed
Yes.
their welcome, who have been somewhat obnoxious
Yes.
in their approach, who
Yes.
maybe take it for granted, who feel entitled, fill in the blank? Well, what does the Yechmach Moshe teach you about how you need to behave in those moments?
Godlike.
And what does godlike mean, Lauren?
Still find the godliness in them, even though they're obnoxious.
Exactly. Exactly. Even when they may not be displaying their best self, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't always be displaying our best self. Nice, Rob.
I'm going to take this to an extreme because there's this news story about this woman who lives in an Airbnb on the West Side and has not paid they've gone to court and they've been told that they have to that there's rules that allow her to stay in this Airbnb even though she hasn't paid. That's an extreme, and I guess it's a little different from what they're a guest in a sense, but it's a business transaction. Is there any relationship here that you can make to that?
Yeah, that's an excellent. I remember reading that story as well in the newspaper. And I guess what we could say is there's an ideal place to be, and then there is the need to also make sure that we are taking care of ourselves properly. Because if we don't take care of ourselves properly, then we cannot be of service to another person. If we allow ourselves to constantly be taken advantage of, then we're not doing well by us or by another human being. What does the mitzvah say in Leviticus chapter 19? Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha. Love another as you love yourself. To love yourself, Rob, means to create proper boundaries. And I think in that case that you're sharing, the person who's fighting this woman is saying, I can't be taken advantage of. There are limits to my goodness. There are limits. And while this is a business transaction, she has an obligation to me. And there may be other people out there that I need to serve, and she's taking advantage of it. So I'm glad you raised it because there is one side of the extreme. But what we don't want to do is we don't want to allow ourselves to rationalize out the moments where we can extend ourselves even a little bit more than we are extending ourselves. And we don't want to jump to the conclusion that when people are obnoxious or acting with entitlement, that we immediately go to the place of judgment. And that we, according to Yismach Moshe, find it in our heart to be a little bit more forgiving, a little bit more welcoming. Because in that act of forgiveness and welcoming, we may change the demeanor of that other person and make them realize, right, how gracious we've been and how ungracious they've been. Now, that's not the goal, but that could be a byproduct of our graciousness. And again, I want you to think about a moment in your own life where, you were not as gracious as you could have been to somebody who you're thinking they didn't really deserve my graciousness. And yet you could possibly have done a little bit more. And that's what he's offering here. That's the lesson. Abraham did not have to leave his tent to run full speed ahead to grab those, what turned out to be angels. But he did. He did. And from that, we learn, right, that, and when we do that, we gaze upon the pleasant glow of the light of the face of the living God. And notice it says the living God, right? Because it's what Kathleen said before. We find the face of the living God in the face of the living human being. Lauren, did you just raise your hand?
Yes, I did. I remember in our Musar class, somebody said, sometimes it's not about the interaction you have today. It's about the history of all the other interactions you've had with the person. So it's like a history of obnoxious interactions you've had with that person. So they might be perfectly nice one particular time, but you've had so many disagreeable interactions with that person that you're not even reacting to how they happen to be on one particular moment. So it's history, and it's years and years of obnoxious interactions with them. So it becomes very difficult
Yeah.
with people.
Well, nobody said that observing mitzvot is easy.
Yeah.
Nobody said observing mitzvot with people who are difficult to us is easy.
Right.
And I don't think the point of it is to be easy. The
No.
point of it is to push us to grow.
Right.
That's really what's going on here. So
Right.
there's a few questions just to ponder based upon the text. Number one is, what has been your experience of receiving the Shekhinah? Is that a question that you have ever contemplated? Like, what does it mean for you to accept in your life the presence of God? Right? Do you ever think in those terms? Yeah, Nancy. Make sure you unmute, Nancy.
Whether, when you're receiving somebody in your home, whether they're ungrateful or not, you don't change your focus. You still stay in the eyes of God doing something right, and you're on the good side, and no matter whether they appreciate it or not, in the eyes of God, you're doing the right thing.
Good. So when you stay true to your values, to those values of community and of Judaism, regardless of what other people are doing, that for you is an example of receiving the Shekhinah, staying true to the goodness that is within me. Nice. Other thoughts? All right, what about the next question? What does it mean to you to gaze upon the pleasant glow of the light of the face of the living God? Is this a metaphor, or is there some way in which it might be a concrete, attainable experience? For you, what does it mean to gaze upon the pleasant glow of the light of the face of the living God? Where have you, when have you gazed upon the pleasant glow of the light of the face of the living God? Leora.
I'm sorry to say that, but usually when there is a face that I don't like or makes me kind of uncomfortable, all I'm trying to do is remember that this is a creation of God and the image of God. So it's right there.
Okay. Others? I'll share with you, for me, one. When I gathered together with a family to do a funeral intake where I write a eulogy based upon the conversation that I'm having with that family, in the moment that I am with that family, I feel like I am gazing upon the pleasant glow of the light of the face of the living God. Like when that family is going through the process of reflecting, remembering good and bad, beauty and difficulty, right, with their loved one, I see that as an encounter with the divine. Eileen.
I think it's when, at least it is for me, a small child or a baby laughs or smiles or hugs you and tells you they love you. To me, that's seeing the face of the living God, if that's what it's supposed to do, because it makes you feel so good.
That's a great example. I love that. How can we not but smile and laugh when there is a little baby, a child, just in that open, uproarious laughter? That is the face of God. Excellent. Anybody else want to throw in an idea, Lauren? When have you?
So it always as a teacher, especially teaching first grade, where, well, in those days, you used to teach them how to read. So children came in not knowing how to read, and there was like this magic. I used to call it the magic of Christmas, even though I wasn't Christian. And all of a sudden they were being able to sound out words and form sentences. And you would see it in their faces when they would be able to read. It was like something was happening. I mean, I had something to do with it, but I think it was God. I mean, I don't know. To this day, I really don't know how children learn how to read. And I taught for, close to 40 years. And, this morning we worked in our grandson's kindergarten classroom, and we knew a lot of these kids last year. And all of a sudden they're learning sight words, and you just see it on their faces. Like you put together and it's am, and you put together I really, it's got to be God. I don't know who else to blame it. I don't know how else it's happening. I don't know.
Love that example, right? And when somebody accomplishes some task for the first time that they struggle to figure out how to do it, right? A moment of gazing upon the pleasant glow of the light of the face of the living God. Beautiful example. Anita.
Yeah.
Well, you have brought back a memory from my past from a very long time ago, when we lived in a small town in Texas, and there was a person coming through town who kept kosher. I have no idea who this man was. I was a young child, and my parents invited him in for dinner, and my mother made a steak for him and all the sides that you could possibly want. The steak she made for him would have been the steak all four of us would have eaten. I mean, it totally filled the plate. I looked at the plate he was given and I thought, how can this person eat that much steak? When he was done, of course, he couldn't eat it all. She wrapped up every bit of the remaining steak and gave it to him for his journey. And the expression on his face was such thanksgiving. It brought back a real memory.
That's such a beautiful story. Wow, what a beautiful lesson that your mother taught right there about giving the best, the most to those who are beautiful.
And for us to have had kosher food, they had to buy it from Dallas, which was over 100 miles away.
Wow.
And they went in and had it shipped to us in the small town Tyler at the time.
Wow.
And
so it could have caused real hardship, and yet they were willing to be so gracious in their Hachnasat Orchim for this stranger.
And the lesson for me was right there.
So I guess I want to ask all of us, because that's such a profound example that Anita gave us. Where does that happen for us? I can tell you that I was the beneficiary of Jack's Hachnasat Orchim last week with that magnificent cake. And it wasn't just, that it tasted good. It was that it was created beautifully. It looked stunning, like right out of a bakery. And like the kind of care that we put into a mitzvah for somebody else, that we don't just do it casually. Anita's mother didn't just do this casually. She threw herself and extended beyond the moment by thinking about the future for this gentleman, right? What can we do in this moment, in this day, today, tomorrow, this week, where we really act in that manner of Anita and of Abraham and of Sarah, of extending ourselves to the totality of a mitzvah so that we can gaze upon the pleasant glow of the light of the face of the living God. Okay, let's move on to the next text.
I just want to say thank you, Anita, because of your story. I remembered a lot of my story with not even non-Jewish friends. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. A little bit further along, we have the story of, yeah,
It's
George.
1907, not 17.
Oh, whoops. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
1907. He
Right.
said, I beg you, my friends, do not commit such a wrong. Okay, context. Who is saying this to who? What's the context? George, tell us.
Okay, we're in Saddam now. And there's some guys banging on the door, Lot's door. And essentially they want to sodomize the males, but later he offers his daughters, which is another story, but okay.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
So the context is these three angels have left Abraham,
Yeah.
and they're now on their way to Sodom and Gomorrah,
Mhm.
and they're about to save Lot from the terrible behavior that's going on around. And he is saying to these vicious strangers outside, not vicious strangers, sorry, to the vicious townspeople outside who are mad at Lot for taking in these three angels into his house. They're mad at him and they want to sodomize these men. And Lot says, don't do that. I beg you, my friends, do not commit such a wrong. And as George said, he offers his daughters in exchange. That's not such a good thing. That's a whole other discussion,
Yeah.
which I didn't bring in to talk about,
Yeah.
because I want to focus on Lot's language. Vayomer al na achi tareu. Right? I beg you, my friends, do not commit such a wrong. So the Rabbi Meir of Apta, he says, the word na is an expression of petition. In other words, prayer. So this is how we should read this verse. If you, my friends, do not have the capacity to pray, then seek companionship, tareu, as in friendship, reut, and fellowship. Get friendly and connect to each other with a whole heart. This is effective and a good preparation for prayer. Now, you can say to yourself, what? How did the rabbi go from the context of Lot trying to save himself and the strangers who visited him in this heated moment? How did Rabbi Meir of Apta get away from that and read in this something completely different? So Rabbi Jonathan Slater says, clearly this teaching has nothing to do with Lot and the men of Sodom. Or does it? Might it be that prayer is the opposite of violence, the antithesis of the emptiness that turns the suffering of others into entertainment? Could it be that the trouble in Sodom, the source of its particular violence, was the absence of connection among people, the lack of friendship and fellow feeling, rather than the product? Further, one spiritual theme in the Jewish mystical tradition is that of unification. Oh, you know what? We'll get to that later. Hold on. That actually really goes down here. Should go like that. Okay. So let's just stop, with this period. What do you think about his commentary? What do you think about Rabbi Meir's commentary? What is this teaching us in general? What are your thoughts? Yeah, Rob.
Rabbi Meir almost seems like he is adopting the philosophy of pantheism, that God and human beings are are one. And I know that's not really a Jewish tradition, although it'd be interesting to explore it. But he's saying, well, if you can't pray, seek out other human beings, because in a sense your companionship and your relationship with other human beings is in a sense a relationship with God. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what he's saying. I think that's a beautiful interpretation. Do you know that? Oh, I'll frame it in a totally different way. You know that old joke about the two guys who come to services, and one says, "I come to talk to God," and the other one says, "I come to talk to my friend who's talking to God." I mean, I didn't tell the joke very well, but the gist is that not everybody who comes to synagogue is able to, ready to, understanding of how to connect with God. And yet that doesn't rule out the holy work that they may be doing. There are people every week, volunteers, who come to shul on Shabbat and spend their time in the kitchen preparing.
Yeah.
That they're volunteering their time to prepare a meal for those who come to shul every Shabbat. In my sense, that's exactly what's going on here. That is the kind of prayer that they're engaged in. Through food, which we know has such a power of bringing people together, they're providing the means for companionship, for friendship. Think about when you sit after services at the table talking with people. And what are you doing in those moments? You are engaging in relationship building, in deepening friendship over a plate of food. That is prayer. And those who prepare it are also engaged in the holy act of prayer and of connecting to God. Right? In a sense, it's similar to the text that we just looked at above. Hachnasat orchim, welcoming strangers into your home, is welcoming the face of God into your home. Lauren.
Well, you know, when our children were little and we lit the Hanukkah candles, it was very joyous. When they moved out and it was just me and Mark lighting the Hanukkah candles, it wasn't quite as joyous. And it's the same as like if I'm home alone to light the Shabbat candles by myself, it's lonely. I mean, it's like you wouldn't have a shiva. You wouldn't sit shiva by yourself. I mean, it's like you kind of need like a community around you to do those rituals. So I'm thinking the same thing with prayer. You need a shiva minyan to say Yiska. You don't do it by yourself. So there's something about people around you to elevate you, to make you feel part of a group, I guess.
There's no question that Judaism is a religion that is much harder to celebrate individually, all alone.
Yeah.
We don't commune with God as easily when we are communing with God by ourselves than when we are communing with God with other people. There's something powerful in that moment. In my high holiday sermon on Rosh Hashanah, when I was talking about awe, I spoke about this moment in the Himalayan mountains with non-Jews who decided to stay with me to celebrate Yom Kippur with me and fast and pray. And right in that moment, community was created in the most powerful way. Not because we were sharing the same theology, the same ideology, the same prayers, but we were sharing companionship and friendship together. And that's so powerful. Stan.
Well, we go to Shabbat services to engage in ritual, to do the prayers, to read the Torah in prescribed ways, but we also engage in community. And to me, the community is at least as important, if not more so, than the ritual. You don't have one without the other.
Correct. That's the key, the last comment you made. We need both of them. We're going to end with just some questions for you to think about on your way out. In your experience, what are the necessary conditions for prayer to flow from the heart? What do you do to prepare to pray? How do you understand that connecting to other people prepares the heart for prayer? And how do you sense that engaging in prayer helps to keep you from falling into the ways of Sodom? So no shortage of ideas in a world in which our prayers, our hachnasat orchim, our friendships, our coming together as community are essential to fighting the external battles that are raging around us as Jews, to support those in Israel. I think these two texts provide us guidance for how we can nourish ourselves, sustain ourselves, build strength amongst ourselves in order to be able to help those out there who so desperately need our prayers and our support. So I wish all of you a wonderful rest of your week. This coming Friday night, there is a 6 o'clock Zamru magical service led by our cantorial soloist Jenny Asher, followed by dinner from 6 to 7. And next week, Shabbat morning, our first one of the year, first one is HAMAKOM. Cantor Jenny and I are doing a Zamru Shabbat morning service instead of the Neshama service. So hopefully it will be an experience that is meaningful and different for everybody who is able to come. So a good week, a good Shabbos, our prayers for those in Israel, and I will see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.